So you were involved, you initiated and were involved in this series of very high-level, large-scale investigations, prosecutions, settlements. What first led you to think that there was something worth investigating?
I think anybody who has had any contact with the financial services sector over time understands, first, as with any sector of that magnitude, there will be individual improprieties. As one who had studied the sector a bit more deeply, perhaps, than some who had been either attorneys general or line prosecutors, I also appreciated what I believed were structural problems in the way the financial services sector interacted with many / most investors.
How did you first come to investigate, know about, learn about the industry?
I grew up in New York. As I joke, half my friends run hedge funds, the other half are the big investment banks. And the reality is many of the friends, colleagues whom I've had and known over the years ended up migrating to Wall Street. The enormous salaries and prosperity generated by the street for many years drew incredibly talented people. And as a consequence, certainly living in New York, you not only knew many people who were there, but began to think somewhat more deeply about how is the industry structured, what is it doing, how is it doing it, as one who was not part of that industry, but was at various points in time either a prosecutor or a lawyer, sometimes lawyering the transactions they were involved in, and sometimes through my family as well, investors in deals that they were structuring. You began to understand from different perspectives what they did, how they did it, what the upsides were, and see necessarily some of the tensions and conflicts that led to the problems of greater magnitude or lesser magnitude that we are now living through.
Was it and is it your personal opinion that the senior people were in fact guilty?
My view is that anybody within the investment bank was aware of the fact that the analytical work was tainted by the desire to bring in investment banking business, and that the convergence of this and the entire business model depended upon it. Jack Rubman, who was one of the more famous analysts, certainly in the telecom sector, whose work was substantially critiqued, got it right when he said what used to be viewed as a conflict of interest is now viewed as a synergy. In other words, those in the industry and even most regulators had defined the problem away, partly by just ignoring it, partly by pretending that there was some business model that turned this into an upside for the marketplace, which was all sort of just, I think, a way to handle denial. Nobody wanted to see it. And so if you use the word guilty in a generic sense, yes, they were guilty of knowing that something was wrong. Mm-hmm. Guilty in a sense that they were provably guilty of a criminal case is a very different matter.
Not provably. My question was not about, I understand your point about proof, but there's a difference between proof and what your opinion is about their real culpability.
Were they guilty of knowing that the analytical work was being tainted and damaged by the desire to get investment banking business? Yes.
Were they guilty of actually causing that taint?
Well, this is the sequence that we would pursue as a matter of law, because if you can then say they intentionally created a compensation system to get to that point, could you make a case based upon that alone? You get into murkier territory. Mm-hmm. But certainly, yes, they created a compensation system that was designed to get the outcome they got. Mm-hmm. The compensation system was, look, we want you to bring in investment banking business because those investment banking fees are really what keeps the business going, more than the trading that we generate from the analytical work. So sure, I mean, and that's why it was an industry-wide problem. Everybody knew about it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, and this is one of the pieces in the interaction I had with the SEC and the other regulators knew about it. But rather than address it directly, they had gone to the industry and say, deal with it. In other words, don't forget, this was a period where the mantra self-regulation had carried the day. Now, I happen to think self-regulation is an oxymoron. It doesn't work. You shouldn't expect it to work. You're expecting people to act completely contrary to self-interest, and I'm hard-pressed to think of a case where it has ever worked on a significant issue. But this was at a period where Harvey Pitt was chair of the SEC, had begun his tenure there by saying there will be a softer, kindler SEC, And right, that was an accepted worldview. I disagree with it fundamentally. It was an intellectual framework that many people had bought into.
One of the most prominent characteristics, by far the only one, perhaps not the dominant one, but one very prominent characteristic of the behavior that led to the current crisis was that in a number of cases, investment banks, mortgage originators, a variety of actors in the financial system sold stuff to other people that they knew wasn't worth very much.
No question about it. I mean, you look, to get a look, if you wish to, at my testimony before I think it was the House Financial Services Committee, may have been Energy and Commerce Committee, oddly, back in February of '08, February 13, in an op-ed piece that I wrote that was printed in the Washington Post that morning, which went through sequentially different chains, links in the chain of culpable individuals in terms of the subprime debt, from the originators to the rating agencies to the investment banks that were then marketing it. You're right, there was culpability up and down, and some of that theoretically is the same as what was going on in the analyst context. We replay the story over and over again, and so then you ask yourself, when you're sitting where I was then or am now, how do you address this? How can you fundamentally shift a paradigm so that people will be more honest with their customers? It's very hard. There is an enormous profit incentive there for the banks to do things that are over the line. And so you attack these problems sequentially. The problem of the moment, high-speed trading, another one, where, to me, this is front-running, as age-old a problem as you will ever find. And yet the problem keeps recurring, slightly different format, slightly different fact pattern and technology, but the same problem. And what it comes down to at the end of the day is a violation of one's fiduciary obligation to one's client. If there's sort of an overarching issue that under an umbrella under which all of these issues fit, that's it. And getting people to live up to that fiduciary duty, which is probably about as boring an issue as you can try to get people excited about, is really the nub of the problem. Because if people were loyal to that fiduciary duty, then most of these problems would not occur. Whether it's a loan officer to somebody whom you're marketing a loan, whether it is a bank trying to sell a securitized debt instrument, at every one of these points, truthfulness and loyalty to fiduciary duty would resolve the problem.
You agree that there is something worth investigating?
Oh, there's no question. Let me make a distinction, not to hedge on the answer. The distinction is between misjudgments that do not create criminal liability, that are really bad misjudgments that can have enormous consequences like a crash, but are not, as I say, necessarily illegal. On the other hand, you have decisions that are sufficient to create civil and or criminal liability that should be pursued. The question is, where is the line in all of what has happened? And my guess is that there will be a fair number of prosecutions because the magnitude...
Will be or should be?
Both. I think there will be, and the political pressure now will force the Justice Department, the SEC, to move forward because the magnitude of financial harm was so great that people are looking for villains. Now, I always worry that the search for villains can sometimes generate bad judgment calls, but there are villains here. There are people who were, without any question, taken through the chain, marketing bad loans to people who couldn't afford them, misrepresenting the financial quality of those loans, which then took these toxic assets and pushed them into a financial stream that people bought, which at prices that were simply not real, which when they imploded, generated this enormous harm. There were trading patterns that were improper. So anywhere you look, there was a fair bit of foul play.
The rating agencies?
Rating agencies are front and center here. And look, I feel a bit of remorse. We were going to take a look at the rating agencies way back because the conflict of interest that we looked at in the analyst cases existed for the rating agencies in the sense that the rating agencies are paid by the companies whose bonds they're rating. Everybody's known this. Everybody's always said it's got to affect the outcome. And there was no trigger. We didn't do it. Everybody said and I wanted to. We just didn't get to it because we were doing other things. And may or may not be an acceptable answer at this point in time. But everybody said, look, rating agencies just don't do their jobs properly. And as I've pointed out, they never catch an inflection point. It's very easy to be right when things move on a straight line, but things don't move in a straight line forever. And being able to understand where you're going to hit a cliff or a shift in direction, that's really what you're paying for. They never got it right because they had no incentive to.
And why haven't there been any serious investigations?
Don't know. Look, there are days when I wake up and for many reasons wish I were back doing it. There should be. There really should be. I would frankly start over with the rating agencies. I would say it's not clear to me that their ratings right now serve any purpose other than to give legal cover to entities that want to be able to say we only have AAA rated securities in our portfolio. And in a way, the rating agencies are to that structure what the CDSs were to the entire bond market. People would buy the credit default swaps kind of on a wing and a prayer, hoping that somebody had the collateral to back them up, but it gave them the comfort they could go to the board and say, look, we've covered, we've hedged, we've laid the risk off somewhere else. But it didn't work.
And you really have no idea whatsoever why there haven't been any investigations yet?
No, I mean, look, I've been out of this for too many years to. It wouldn't be a terribly hard thing to do. There have been some efforts to peer into the emails. I don't know honestly what came of it, but I think, look, the SEC has immediate jurisdiction over the rating agencies. Every attorney general, state attorney general, could do it. Frankly, what they should do is what we did back in the analyst cases, which was after we made the first case against Merrill, and there was. Let me take a step back for a second to sort of debunk another myth. In the securities bureau that I had in the state AG's office, I think we had 10 lawyers. 10. The SEC has thousands of lawyers. The argument is always made the SEC doesn't do more because it's been underfunded. Well, maybe it's been underfunded, I don't know. They've got a budget that is so exponentially greater than what we had. Their failure to act is a result of their failure to either know what questions to ask or to want to ask those questions. Now, when we got into the analyst cases, we did Merrill Lynch, which basically took all the resources we had. We then said, as per your earlier question, we want to do an equivalent investigation of each of the bulge bracket firms. And we then got other states to join us, and we basically pawned off investment banks to various states. We said, look, you have 10 people here, you'll do UBS, or you do Lehman, or you do Bear Stearns, or you do Goldman. And we all just took our share. What they should do right now is, frankly, there are only 3 big rating agencies. They should be allocated among various states and say, dig into it. Find out every conflict, and then rewrite the entire system and mechanism, come up with a new way of paying for ratings to be done. Apparently, let me add one other thought.
Please.
The problem people will encounter is how do you then pay for the ratings? And this will come back to the issue we had to deal with when we wanted to restructure the analyst side of investment banking. Who's going to pay for it? And why? And how do you ensure independence and draw people to it? How do you generate a revenue stream that will be sufficient to give you the quality people you need to do the work that you need?
Was that clear? Did that get through?
If we can just get that last sentence that you just...
Okay. Sorry.
How are you going to find a revenue stream sufficient to get the quality people you need to do the ratings work and somehow protect them from the outside pressures?
Well, there have been, as I'm sure you know, there have been a variety of proposals in that regard. Yeah. It's not that complicated.
It's not complicated, but it's hard to get it to work. That's why I'm saying we went through this with analysts. We considered everything from everybody who is an issuer of stock will pay into a pool and essentially turn it into a public good. Mm-hmm. One idea was have the SEC do it. One idea was to have the investment banks do 2 different, one for the investment banking side, one for the analyst side. As we played with everything, mm-hmm. And some of the ideas look good on paper, but aren't as good once you play them out. But this is what we got to deal with.